Good morning, everyone. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person with you. I had some surgery 2 weeks ago. I'm not allowed to fly until the end of the month. But I didn't want to lose the opportunity to address this audience. Now, I know the value of your time. You have a busy day planned, so I'm going to keep my remarks brief and focused. I'm here today to talk to you about two things: the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act legislation being proposed and environmental assessments themselves. On SEA, I can't say much. Commentary on legislation that is yet to be introduced to the House of Commons isn't allowed, so my hands are tied. But I can say this: you've been heard. The importance of this sector, the importance of this resource, and its importance to this province have been heard loud and clear by my cabinet colleagues. So let's talk about assessments. In the latest copy of your magazine, you say, quote, "For the past several months, NOIA has been strongly advocating for a renewed environmental assessment process that avoids adding unnecessary duplication or additional approval time to an already effective process." I couldn't agree more, except for the last point. The process is not effective. Regulatory certainty is a pillar of our approach to environmental assessment, and it is no stretch to say that this pillar has crumbled under the SEA 2012 legislation passed by the previous government. There is no more glaring example of where the process has failed than the Indigenous consultation requirement of the environmental assessment process. It wasn't surprising to us when the Supreme Court of Canada this past July overturned the National Energy Board decision in the Clyde River case and upheld it in the Chippewas case, or when the Federal Court of Appeal overturned the Northern Gateway pipeline approval. So until new legislation is passed, we're forced to live with SEA 2012. Your 6 members of Parliament do that by working closely with Premier Ball and the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador. We constantly champion this industry in National Caucus and in the House of Commons. We constantly impress upon our colleagues who sit in Cabinet on how crucial it is to this province's future, meeting with the Minister of Natural Resource and the Minister of the Environment on several occasions. And to ensure regulatory certainty for the 4, soon-to-be 5 proponents seeking to undertake exploratory drilling on the Flemish Pass and Jeanne d'Arc Basin, we are engaging in a meaningful dialogue with affected Indigenous groups in a proactive way. It is unfortunate that the previous process employed under SEA didn't fully appreciate the devastating impact an injunction would have on our industry. We're confident that our process is meaningful, educates groups about the process, and remains focused on the projects at hand. And our approach has allowed us to approve projects like TMX, Line 3, and Nova Gas. We've seen a great deal of openness by affected Indigenous groups to evaluate the projects together, as most of the risks and rights are common to all projects. By helping Indigenous leaders fulfill their own obligations to their members, we can have confidence that approvals granted within the legislative timelines will not be overturned by the courts. And these Indigenous leaders do have obligations to their membership on these matters. Can you imagine if an energy project in another province could potentially have an impact on crab or shrimp stocks in 3PS? We would demand that our provincial government at least be consulted on it. But the duty to consult with Indigenous populations is not just a political consideration. It is a legal obligation of the Government of Canada, not just this government, any government. Whether you would like to debate its merits, whether you think it's good public policy, or whether you think it's an unnecessary burden, those considerations are moot in the opinion of the Supreme Court of Canada. At this time, we have an obligation to consult with groups that may be impacted. Don't mistake this for something that only happens in Newfoundland and Labrador. The duty to consult is a federal obligation. Similar situations arise for all projects, whether it's the Frontier Oil Sands Mine in Alberta, the Lynn Lake Gold Project in Manitoba, or the Rose Lithium Tantalum Project in Quebec. Caribou is probably the best example on land. Any new project that could potentially affect a herd would mean that any Indigenous group in its range, spanning sometimes thousands of square kilometers, crossing territorial and provincial boundaries, it has to be consulted. And salmon is another one. If salmon swim through your parcel, well, you can engage in a consultation or litigation. That's the choice. The salmon's migratory pattern is indifferent to jurisdictional boundaries. Our industry here is not an island unto itself, but we cannot ignore its prominence on our landscape here in the province. Our view is that consultations should inform, but not impede, our development of natural resources, especially when it comes to our offshore oil and gas industry. Just look what happened with the last government. Stephen Harper tried to sidestep the duty to consult, and it was all for naught. For 10 years, they tried to either sidestep it or bulldoze through it, and they failed at every turn. You can't get cute with this. I know the value of this industry. I worked on technology transfer in oil and gas during the Clyde Wells government, on royalty regimes during the Brian Tobin government. I know that this room provides 23% of Canada's light crude. I know that oil and gas revenues alone will contribute almost $1 billion to the province in 2017. Newfoundland and Labrador, indeed Canada, needs a healthy, profitable offshore oil and gas industry. And we know this is a highly competitive international industry. We know that getting the environmental assessment process right is crucial to that competitiveness. We also know we have a duty to consult, now enshrined in law. Our challenge, therefore, is to work together to streamline that process and still effectively meet that legal obligation. Now, I know how important trust is to your business. You need it with your shareholders, your stakeholders, your employees. Our objective is to help build that trust. And we can only build public trust together. We build it by fixing an obviously broken process. We build it by giving a voice to those calling for greater transparency and openness. And we build it by assessing the true costs, both explicit and implicit, before we sanction a project. Now again, I can't speculate on what might be in the legislation, but I would note that the review panel recommended that timelines for the planning phase could be streamlined where proponents undertake community engagement early and on their own initiative. And we certainly need to find ways to make the process more efficient, consistent, and predictable. For instance, do we need to study the same parcel for the same issue time and time again? I believe that there is a strong argument under the right conditions to not require well-understood exploratory wells to be on the designated list. This would be achieved through the regulatory process and essentially place oversight in the hands of the CNLOPB. And the CNLOPB should be the steward of a one project, one assessment analysis. When you move from exploration to production, the public interest analysis should dovetail with analysis already conducted. In other words, the Atlantic Accord should be upheld and respected. And personally, I believe that a local presence would allow the federal agency responsible for assessments to work hand in glove with the CNLOPB, combining their mutual expertise to efficiently gather information and reach the decisions for which they are individually responsible. This is something I've often discussed with my cabinet colleagues when I'm briefing them on this industry and its value to the future of Newfoundland and Labrador, and to Canada for that matter. And I'll be honest, during those conversations I can be a little frank, and it baffles me that the only major player who thinks this industry is still based in Halifax is the Federal Civil Service. This situation needs to be addressed. If the federal government wants a seat at the table, the least we can do is be in the same city as the table. The environmental assessment process is vital. It is vital to this industry. It is vital to our province's economy. It is vital to this country's prosperity. We must work together to find effective, efficient means to sustainably maximize the value of our resources while fulfilling our legal obligations. I look forward to working with you, to hearing about the success of this conference and the success of its attendees in the years to come, because I want nothing less than a global center of excellence for offshore oil and gas extraction right here in St. John's. Thank you for your time. Thank you for accommodating me, and I look forward to working with you in the weeks, months, and years ahead.